Imagine walking into your office on Monday morning. Your inbox contains 20 reports. Finance has sent one, HR has sent another, operations has sent three, sales has six. Projects have updates, customer service has dashboards, IT has system reports. By lunchtime, you've reviewed hundreds of data points. Now, here's the question. Do you actually understand your business any better, or have you simply consumed more information? Today, we're opening another Blue Qubit case file. The CEO who drowned in dashboards. Sounds a little dramatic, I know, but welcome back to today's Blue Qubit Executive Intelligence. My name is Kerry-Ann Nelson-Peynado, and I'm your host for today. But joining with me is a familiar face that you've probably seen from episode one, our founder and CEO, Feroze Hanif. Feroze has spent many years helping organizations transform through technology, innovation, and smarter business strategy. One recurring challenge he sees is that leaders often have more data than ever before, but less clarity. Welcome, Feroze.
Good morning, Kerry-Ann. Thank you for having me here today.
Thanks for being a part of the session. All right. So today, as you know, in True Fashion, we're going to show a short documentary. So it compares two CEOs leading similar organizations. One receives endless reports and dashboards every week. The other receives a focused executive intelligence view designed to highlight only what truly requires leadership attention. As you watch, don't focus on the amounts of data. Focus on how each leader makes decisions. So let's jump in.
Executives today have unprecedented visibility into their operations, yet that access rarely translates into clarity. As the volume of data streams increases, the probability of missing a critical signal rises with it. To observe how information design influences leadership, we tracked two identical companies facing the same morning data drop. CEO A receives a standard corporate reporting package, dozens of raw spreadsheets, dense financial tables, and a constant stream of automated system notifications. CEO B receives a curated executive dashboard. It displays only 3 specific metrics, each accompanied by a simple arrow indicating its current trajectory. At 2 p.m. today, an external market shift will hit both companies. The success of their response depends entirely on what they do with their data before the clock strikes 2. Over the next 5 hours, the specific format of this incoming information will dictate which leader spots the crisis and which one is buried by it. At 9 a.m., the data arrives. CEO A begins the morning by hunting for context. They move between CRM logs and financial software, manually cross-referencing numbers to determine if their current margins match their projections. Every time a leader switches contexts between different systems, they burn cognitive energy. Focus is diverted from strategy to simple navigation. By mid-morning, CEO A is already experiencing mental fatigue. They spend their highest value hours doing manual processing their software should have eliminated. CEO B spends less than 60 seconds on their dashboard. They immediately identify a single trend line in supply chain velocity that has dipped below the threshold. While raw data requires the leader to find the narrative, executive intelligence delivers the insight immediately upon login. By 12 p.m., both companies are 2 hours away from a major operational test. CEO A recognizes that something is wrong, but cannot pinpoint the cause. They call an emergency meeting with department heads to reconcile the conflicting numbers in their reports. The meeting quickly devolves into an argument over data accuracy. Finance, sales, and operations each present different figures, and the group spends 90 minutes trying to agree on a single source of truth. CEO B bypasses the conference room entirely. Because their data is already unified and verified, they spend the lunch hour finalizing a contract with an alternate logistics provider. When data is siloed, an organization loses its ability to move. Time that should be spent on execution is instead consumed by internal efforts to reach a basic consensus on the facts. At 2 p.m., the market shift hits. A primary supplier halts all shipments, effective immediately. CEO A is paralyzed. Their reports are reactive, showing the impact of the shutdown minutes after it has already disrupted their production line. CEOB's earlier pivot begins to pay off. The Altria provider is already on standby, and resources are diverted without a single hour of downtime. Reactive reporting explains what went wrong. Predictive intelligence identifies what to do next. To prevent this type of failure, we have to look at the mechanical difference between these two systems. Standard reporting is a historical log. It dumps the burden of analysis onto the user, who filters noise to find meaning. Executive intelligence reverses that workflow. It cleans and synthesizes data, presenting only specific metrics requiring a human decision. When an executive is forced to hunt for information, they experience data fatigue, a state where the brain begins to oversimplify risks and ignore subtle warnings. Increasing the amount of data in a crisis often decreases the quality of the response. At 5 p.m., CEOA is preparing to work through the weekend to catch up on the day's backlog. CEOB has already closed their laptop. Despite working identical hours, CEOA spent the day fighting the software, while CEOB spent the day leading the business. Decision-making is the primary function of the executive, yet CEOA spent 80% of their day performing the manual cleanup their systems should have handled. When technology requires the user to build the narrative, it shifts the labor from the machine to the person it was meant to assist. Look at the screen you rely on to manage your organization. Does your dashboard highlight the decisions you need to make, or does it simply list the activities that have already occurred? In a high-speed market, the margin for success is the distance between receiving a data point and understanding its impact. The investigation continues. Let's go to the panel.
All right. So every time I watch that documentary, I'm reminded that information alone doesn't create confidence. So Feroze, what immediately stood out to you?
You know, Kerry-Ann, it is very obvious in the video that we're surrounded by data, a lot of data, a lot of systems, right? And what ends up happening is all of this data becomes noise, and it's very hard to detect where the signals are within all this noise that's coming from various different systems, right? It's basically where you have a lot of information overflow, and for decision makers, that becomes a challenge when you're not able to quickly see the different signals for decision making. I think that's what stood out for me.
Right. I can see that as well. And you mentioned a key point for noise. So in the documentary, they weren't really missing information. To me, it seems like he was missing direction. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, 100%, right. And that's once again the outcome of all of this different type of data from these systems. No doubt, these systems have made us very efficient in processing, in business process, but it also generates a lot of data. And how do you make sense of all of this data? That's the big question.
Mhm. So, what do you think? Why do leaders often believe that more reports or more dashboards will improve decision making?
I think historically what has happened is you've had leaders who've been waiting for these executive daily briefings, reporting, right? And when the data coming in used to be small, right? A smaller amount of data, it made sense. Now you have a dashboard in every single system. So you look at a system, a finance system, you look at a procurement system, you look at a purchasing system, and then all of a sudden you have all these systems and all of them have their own dashboards, right? And I think that's where the challenge comes in.
Right. I do see that as well. So finding that ecosystem is very crucial. So let's imagine for a little bit that we have a CEO starting tomorrow to grow their organization, right? If they could only review 5 executive indicators in the morning, what would you think would be some of those? I do have a few listed on here, but anything that stood out to you for some of those executive indicators?
Yeah, from my perspective, a executive needs to know what decision to make, right? Um, Now, the modern executive lives in the space where the time is very limited because most CEOs are hands-on, and so they have very limited time. So first thing in the morning, they're looking for is what is the decision that I need to make today, right? Um, and I think that's where these intelligent uh, reporting or dashboarding systems come into play that aggregate the data across multiple different systems so that it helps the executives make those important decisions very quickly.
Mhm. Right. I can definitely see that. And that's definitely helpful for anyone out there listening for this particular way to start their day as a CEO or even as a leader, because we do have different hats wearing in different organizations as well. So focus, volume, outcome, and time impact is what we have here. What should we do is what you are looking for intelligence rather than the traditional what happened answers. Isolate the minimum visible metrics rather than maximizing the total data point. That's a whole lot of noise, as mentioned before. And then the outcome, what drives immediate decision versus what are the questions? So creating questions doesn't necessarily help, but what do I need to decide on? And then talking a little bit about the time. So executives tend to not have that much time. So how can we get this done within a limited amount of time? And what's interesting is that none of those mentioned before are isolated metrics. They're all connected. So a drop in productivity eventually affects like a customer experience, right? An operational issue influence revenue. Everything is linked. Uh, have you seen that, Feroze, across organizations and within digital transformation?
Yeah, and what ends up happening is uh, the executives are looking for signals to make a quick uh, decision and make a change. And when we look at several different organizations, what we see is that they're not able to pivot fast enough because the executive is not able to see the signals coming in, right? Um, a lot of times, I'm gonna give an example of a customer service organization where, based on the outbound calls, if the scripts are not as effective, then what ends up happening is you may go by a month, 2 months before all of that data, is collected, and then the outcome where there is dissatisfaction, right? Whereas um, if you have systems that are integrated and signals are very clearly visible to the executives, they can quickly make that decision to change the calling scripts, right? So this is just an example of what I've seen in one of the companies.
Yeah, for sure. And that mirrors back with quality over quantity, right? Where it's building a culture of informed decision making while you I guess we would say transform the day-to-day process or how things are done to make it more effective. So the true goal isn't data driven, isn't to just become data driven, it's to become insight driven. Would you say?
Yeah, 100% agreed on that. We live in a world right now where change is happening almost instantaneously. A couple of decades, 3 decades ago, change was much slower. Now change is happening by the minute. And that's why those signals are so important, right? It's not about the data, it's about the insight, as you said, the signal, as I say, right? So that executive can make a quick pivot, change, and then get to a higher level of efficiency or more customer service, or what may you have, right?
Definitely agree with that. So Feroze, let's leave the audience with a little something practical here. So if you're a business leader listening today, what's one thing you should do this week? So if you have a business leader, what should they do this week to start this process?
I think one of the things that, to make it very practical, the business leaders should inform their team uh, that they should come up to them with decision-making information rather than the noise, right? And that can be done without any technology change, without a big transformation. It's a cultural change, right? And as you know, everything starts with the culture change. Um, each warning, if your immediate reports were to come to you with, hey, this is the decision that we need to make based on these signals, are we a go, no go, right? That kind of helps the entire organization pivot faster. So that's something practical that I would say any CEO, any executive can make happen today, right? Without any technology change, without any other organizational business process change. It's a cultural change.
That's true. And I also think about visibility a little bit when I hear of these dashboards. So not every dashboard actually gives you that visibility, right? And it's having visibility that is simplified and connected to your teams. How would you express that to someone who is trying to figure that out? How do I get that?
Yeah, the dashboards are there, kind of aggregating the data, but doesn't actually help you make a decision, right? Um, if you look at just different dashboards all day long, right, that's where most executives have fatigue because they're still trying to uh, decipher the data behind it, right? And it, at least to me, it becomes more of an exhausting task to look at dashboards to gain the insights. Uh, I think the modern systems should be able to talk to each other, right, to get to the point where it's providing the right signal in a more centralized, uniformed manner, rather than having 15 dashboards to take a look at.
I definitely agree. Well, today's discussion definitely reminds us that leaders isn't about being overwhelmed with information. That's leadership. It's about having culture transformation, visibility, and reducing that noise to focusing on what matters most and drives decision. So organizations that thrive are the ones that simplify complexity, connect their data, and empower leaders to act with confidence rather than react to that noise. So, Feroze, I do thank you for joining us today and sharing your perspective. It was very insightful. And I thank you to everyone listening out there. Next week, we'll open up another Blue Qubit case file. We're at case file number 4. Yes, the time is flying by, and we're going to focus a little bit on the invisible employee. So we talked about the leaders. Let's focus a little bit on the employees. So we're going to uncover what's most valuable people, what are most valuable people in our organization often go unnoticed, and what leaders can do to recognize and support the work that truly drives success. So thank you so much for coming out. I hope to see you in the next episode. Don't forget to comment below, follow, like, and of course, let us know what you think so far, because you are truly our investigators on the other end. So thanks for coming to the next. I will see you next time. Bye.
Thank you, Kerry-Ann. Bye-bye.